Is Rishi Sunak delivering on illegal migration? Keir Starmer goes nuclear and money for nothing. This is Politics Live. Joining me, Local Government Minister Lee Rowley, Labour MP Emma Hardy, Observer leader writer Sonia Soda and Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley. Today, Rishi Sunak takes to the Channel.
I have confidence that the plan is working. We're obviously not there yet. There's lots of work to do.
Can the Prime Minister meet his pledge to stop the boats?
It's that nuclear combined with renewables that is going to be powering our country for decades and decades to come.
Keir Starmer has said no to new oil and gas. So is nuclear the answer?
Most of this is about frothy material, not about meaningful decision-making.
Should the COVID inquiry see ministers' WhatsApp messages? And fancy £1,600 a month for doing nothing?
It was like winning a lottery. Basic income helps me because I'm free to do what I want to do.
Well, you saw the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak there in the headlines. He's in Dover. He's been restating his pledge to stop the boats and what the government calls illegal migration across the Channel. There he is on a patrol boat, and he held that press conference shortly afterwards. Now, he cited in answers to journalists that the number of people making the crossing over the Channel is down by a fifth on last year, but still, so far, 7,600 people have made the crossing. Is he right that the government is turning the tide on small boats or not?
Well, it's early days, but I think the fact that illegal immigration, people landing on the beaches, is reducing compared to elsewhere in Europe where it looks as though it's still going up. We've got a lot of work to do here. The number of people who've come in the last 4 years has gone massively higher. It was only a few hundred a year 4 years ago. It's now over 40,000. There is a lot of work to do. But I think what the Prime Minister is doing, it's one of his priorities, is getting to grips with it, trying to solve the problems, and we're starting to see progress.
Right, but he's not going to stop the boats, is he, by the end of the year?
Well, we want to stop the boats. That's absolutely our intention, is to stop the boats as soon as we're able to do that. That's a combination of improving the processes that are there, it's changing the law, it's making sure that we are clear, getting more returns agreements, it's working more clearly with France. We're starting to see early stages of where that's making progress, but a lot more to do.
Do you think they are turning the tide on the issue of small boats, Emma?
No, I don't. I think this is another opportunity for the Prime Minister to try and get some positive headlines in friendly newspapers, if I'm being absolutely honest. So, no, I don't think it's working. I don't think they have a serious plan to make any of this work, if I'm being honest. I mean, when you look at the illegal asylum bill that's going through Parliament, it is absolutely bonkers. I mean, it is making a bad situation even worse. And when you sort of look into the detail of it, I'm left baffled as to thinking, why are they doing that?
Which bit's bonkers?
Well, the bit that says that their plan with the illegal immigration bill is to say, well, if people come here illegally, they're going to be indefinitely detained. But detained where? Where are these detention centres? Where are these hotels going to be? The Home Office calculates this is going to cost an extra £6 billion a year. And if they're not going to be detained, apparently they're going to be returned. But returned again where? When we don't have the return agreements with other countries. And if the Rwanda plan worked, if it worked...
Well, that's what it's reliant on, I think, isn't it?
Yes. And what are the massive percentages that it relies on? 1 to 2% of all of the people currently waiting for processing. That's how much the Rwanda plan would make a difference.
Lee's in the government. I mean, what are the answers to Emma's questions? Isn't it a bonkers plan if Rwanda so far hasn't taken off? There are very few returns agreements. Albania is always cited. How will you ever achieve stopping the boats?
Rwanda is caught up in the courts, so as soon as we get it through the courts, hopefully we'll need to be able to start using it. The only country in the world who has been able to stop something similar to what we are seeing is Australia.
It's not comparable to here, though,
well, it's somewhat comparable. The offshore processing centre, the ability to be able to have that as an option, as a tool in the arsenal. But fundamentally, we have got to disincentivise people taking incredibly perilous journeys, often at their own risk, some losing their own lives. We've got to do that. We've got a plan. I don't know what the Labour Party says.
Oh, I'm very happy to go through it all with you, Leah. And part of the plan, of course, is to, instead of wasting the money on the Rwanda scheme, which, as I said, only would take 1 to 2%, take that money instead, use that money for an elite police unit to actually go after the real criminals. Who are the real criminals? And this is where Lee and I do agree. The criminal smuggling gangs are introducing criminal activity. They are the ones that we should blame. Take the money from the unworkable, unmanageable and just frankly headline-grabbing nonsense Rwanda plan. Put that money into using this elite police force, go after the criminal gangs and stop people making that perilous crossing. There are 5 other points in the Labour plan for immigration,
but let's just stick with
which I know we might not have time for all
let's
of
just
them
stick
now,
with
but
that
happy
one.
to
This
go over
elite
another time.
police force that would, I presume, patrol the coastline over in France and perhaps in Dover.
We have already increased a lot of the activity there. It's having an impact. One of the reasons, one of the contributing factors to what Rishi's announced today in terms of a 20% reduction so far this year. But what the Labour Party can't answer when you look at their plan as a whole is there is about 900 million people in the world who would move countries if they could do. The UK is in the top 6 place where they would come given a choice.
There are lots of other countries that you can go to as well.
The only way that you reduce that and you ensure that we have protection over our borders is by disincentivising coming here.
Well, let's take that point.
Let's
Let's take that point about actually stopping people, disincentivising people making that journey. Is the government, is Rishi Sunak turning the tide on this pledge to stop the boats? Not reduce them, not deal with people once they're here, to stop them.
I don't think so, and I think the real issue which some of this discussion is revealing actually is that no one really knows how to deal with criminal smuggling gangs, and we've seen in the Mediterranean, for example, where this issue has been far more long-standing, with far bigger numbers of people crossing from countries like Tunisia, for example, across the Mediterranean. The EU has tried desperately to try and stop this. It hasn't worked. They've tried to disrupt these criminal gangs. They pop up somewhere else. It's tried to destroy the wooden boats that smugglers use. Actually, smugglers just then use even more dangerous rubber dinghies. So nowhere has really cracked this issue. And the fact is, numbers are slightly down this year, but that is a product of what's going on in the world. The plan isn't even in place yet. It's not been implemented. So for Rishi Sunak to say, well, it's a matter of success that numbers are down slightly this year, I think he's really overclaiming here.
I mean, Tim, one of the issues is in terms of what happens over in France, and the figures that are cited show that actually French patrols stop an awful lot of the boats coming over, but they don't stop them all. Is that a sign that you could have more of an impact on stopping those boats leaving?
I have absolutely no idea. It was done. It was achieved before when it came to trafficking people in vehicles.
Yeah.
So this has been done before. I don't see why physically it can't be stopped. I mean, from a punter's point of view, I've never understood why an island struggles to control immigration. I mean, it should be easier for us to do it than countries on mainland Europe.
Because people really want to come here.
But they do, and maybe the Tories will have to resort eventually to, instead of a tourist campaign, a campaign encouraging people to stay away because the country is so rotten. I mean, healthcare is rubbish. There's inflation, the price of energy. Perhaps we could sort of persuade people this isn't the country that they think it is. But the Tories have got a real problem here, which is that they are keen to run in the next election on immigration and on stopping the boats. But every time they hammer home the message that we will stop the boats, they just remind people that the boats have been coming under the Tories. And the problem with any kind of centre-right party is if you're going to play the immigration card, which they've done since 2010, when they said they would try and limit the net migration, if you play the immigration card, regardless of the moral, ethical problems of doing that and its impact upon the wider culture, you've actually got to deliver. What you can't do is wind up with a situation where you have anarchy on your sea border, but also you're letting in record numbers of legal migrants. And there is a division within the Conservative government. The Home Office is of the view that they need to be reducing all migration because they think that's what people really want. But there is also a lot of people, particularly focused around the Treasury, who think, no, what people really care about is illegal migration, but they're actually all for legal migration. And I think they're wrong about that.
Right. Why do you keep talking about it? I mean, you don't make the pledges. I mean, you say you will, you might. Why keep talking about immigration? I mean, do you think it is an election-winning strategy, Lee?
It's absolutely vital that people have confidence that their borders are protected. That we say, the British people say, who comes to our country, when they come, and the manner in which they arrive. Full stop. That's what North East Derbyshire tells me. I voted for every single opportunity to stop the votes, and I will continue to do that.
You've got record numbers, so you're failing a pledge that you make repeatedly. To just take Tim's point, why bang on about it?
But people understand that over the course of the last half-decade, there has been a change. We didn't have people coming in small boats 5 or 6 years ago.
Come through the Channel Tunnel. So
and we've been able to resolve some of that, Sonia, right? And so the fundamental is we've got a new problem. I wish it had been dealt with. I wish it had been dealt with quicker over previous summers. But what Rishi is doing is actually getting into the detail, which is what we need to do. And we're starting to see an early example of where it's improving.
There have always been a modest but fluctuating number of people who've arrived from other countries fleeing places like Afghanistan, Syria, for example, conflict and human rights abuses. It varies over time, but it's always been there. We're signed up to international law, which says that we have an obligation to process people's claims for asylum, I think, very quickly and determine who has a right to stay here under international law. That sits outside your system of economic migration. The best thing that the government could do on this would be to invest in the asylum system so they process people's claims much, much more quickly and they deport people who have no right to stay in the UK. In fact, the Home Office systems are abominable. The government hardly deports anyone who doesn't have a right to stay in the UK. And that is the real problem. So I think they are trying to distract to some extent from their own failures over the last 13 years.
Absolutely. All right, 1% of people who came to this country illegally last year have been processed, 1%. And as I said earlier on, this illegal migration bill of theirs is going to make a bad situation even worse because it detains people indefinitely, costing £6 billion extra.
And we're changing it, making it better. And one of the ways in which you ensure those processes work best is you get fewer people coming in on the beaches at the beginning in order so that process can work.
But it's not working. It's going to make a bad situation even worse. And in the meantime, it's going to cost £6 billion, which the country, in my opinion, would be far better spending on things like the NHS and dealing with the cost of living
while
crisis.
Rishi Sunak has been talking about this issue in Dover, the Labour leader Keir Starmer has been at Hinkley Point, the nuclear power station, talking about how Labour will invest in nuclear power as part of the mix to answer our energy problems. He's described the Conservatives presiding over a shambolic failure to open any nuclear power plants during 13 years in power. Do you agree, Lee, the answer to Britain's energy shortage is likely to be nuclear power?
Yes, in part, no doubt. We need a base load which is there continuously, which goes alongside renewables. We've been taking quite a number of steps on nuclear over the past few years. We're the first nuclear power station, which will open in a few years' time, since I was a kid. Since 1995 is opening as a result of decisions we've made. We've agreed another one, which has been agreed last year.
And when are they going to come online?
Mid-2020s.
Right, mid-2020s, and the Conservatives have been in power since 2010. So, I mean, will be taking 15 years.
Yeah, because the reason why we didn't have anything coming on stream in the last decade is because Margaret Beckett in 2003 took 20 years for nuclear power stations to come on train.
Put some facts in this conversation.
Said,
in 2009, the Labour Party approved 10 nuclear power station plants. In 2009, they were approved by the Labour Party, so we left the approval for them for the coalition government in 2010, and they did nothing.
No, but what happened
the idea that it's Labour Party's problem, the fact that we haven't been around to deliver on what we were starting to deliver in 2009.
Emma, how long does it take to deliver a nuclear power station?
A decade and a half.
No, it's 10 years.
Hang on.
It takes a decade and a half to deliver a nuclear power station. The power stations which should be coming on now are the ones that the Labour Party should have agreed between 1997 and 2000.
2009, the Labour Party, those 10...
Emma, don't just talk over.
A single nuclear power station
that is true,
between 1997 and 2000.
Some of those
Zero.
10, Lee, some of those 10 sites that the Labour Party gave approval for in 2009 have now been dropped because of a lack of progress made in the last 13 years. There was 10 there ready to go. Now, if you'd said to me, of those 10, of those 10, so many of them have moved,
no
so
detail,
many of those
no
have
plans,
gone... Yeah,
no planning
what progress have you made in any
nothing.
of them?
We're about to deliver one of them in a few years' time.
Because
Another
what
one
you've
has been
actually
approved.
done is 2 of them have walked away from the table because nothing's... Oh, come on.
Well, all right, on this, I mean,
just
there was a plan for nuclear power stations under the previous Labour government. It was never enacted. In fact, it was, well, a white paper in 2003, I think, urged actually no nuclear power stations. And by the time Tony Blair changed his mind, it was too late. He was almost out of power, and Gordon Brown didn't go ahead with it. So that is what happened. So there were no nuclear power stations built then, and none have been built by the Tory governments since then. How big a problem is that?
I think it's a really big problem. When you take a step back from the politics of it, you cannot get away from the fact that whether it was a Labour government in the late 1990s, the Conservative government over the last 13 years, neither did enough on nuclear. And when you look at the amount of power we were getting from nuclear as a country in the 1990s, it has dropped. There are a number of plants that are going out of service in the next few years. So it is going to continue to drop because the Conservative government have left it too long to act on nuclear. Nuclear is a really critical part of energy infrastructure, both from a green perspective, but also from an energy security perspective, as we've seen from Ukraine. We need to become more self-reliant on our electricity. And I'm afraid, I think there are politicians of both stripes who have been far too slow to act on nuclear.
So there's been failure on both sides, both parties, previous Labour governments and certainly then successive Conservative ones. One of the aspects of the energy policy that seems to have riled, particularly the unions, Emma, is, if I show you this headline in the Times, unions lambast Labour over naive energy plan. This is about Keir Starmer saying no to any new or granting any new oil and gas licences. Do you understand why the unions are angry?
Well, I absolutely love our plan for GB energy. I mean, I think it is the solution to a lot of the woes that we're probably...
What's the answer to my question? Are they right?
Question. OK, so if tomorrow, say, the government said, OK, tomorrow we're going to invest in new oil and gas sites, we're going to go and explore them, we're going to develop them, we're going to get them online. Do you know what the average time for actually making that happen is? 28 years. So the idea that Labour Party are saying, right, let's look at the oil and gas that we have, let's transition slowly over to renewable, let's by 2030 make the UK the world-leading sort of green superpower, which would be absolutely amazing. Let's fulfil our climate promises that we've already made as a country. And while we transition those jobs, let's take all those people in good jobs, and they are good jobs in oil and gas, and let's transition over into green renewables. And we've seen this happen in Hull. We've got offshore wind, we've got Siemens, we've got Ørsted, we've got good new jobs in the city that didn't exist there before, and they're bringing more offshore wind.
So he's wrong. Gary Smith, the
time.
General Secretary of the GMB Union, calls the energy plan naive because of the time of transition. How long is that transition going to take?
Well, I'm just saying, in 28 years you're talking about... So even if the Labour Party said tomorrow...
I'm in the transition to get onto nuclear, to improve the mix with renewables and stop the lights going out. You're also going to...
Of course there's going to be a period of transition. I mean, it's completely sensible policy to say, let's look at the gas and oil that we have now. Let's make a transition over the next decade into renewables, which is about energy security, which is about not having to import energy, not being reliant on foreign dictators, about having that security for our country. Let's make that transition slowly. As we transition, let's retrain and upskill people to work in other industries and jobs. Let's create GB Energy, which would be a revolutionary change for our country. Lower bills, protect our country, protect
well, we'll come
bills.
on to whether it actually means lower bills and when it will mean lower bills for people.
I mean, this is a
Are you with the unions
policy
on this in terms of jobs that could be lost as a result in this transition?
Unusually, I'm with the unions. Not usually one of my natural bedfellows. I mean, the unions are making a hugely important point here. It is a slow transition, and because it's a slow transition, we will still require oil and gas going to 2050 and beyond.
To 2050?
And beyond 2050, because net zero is not absolute zero. There are still some industrial processes which will always require gas.
Which is why we need carbon
so we will need
capture
to take that out of the ground. We should take it out of the ground in the UK, where we can have jobs in places like Scotland.
Hang on a second. Who is right on oil and gas? Keir Starmer or Lee?
Well, I think Lee. But first of all, I seem to have woken up in a foreign country in which people like nuclear. Only a few years ago, everyone was terrified by it because of Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima. And, of course, Germany was on course to actually ban it. They thought it was so bad.
Although it was a little while ago, as you're saying.
A little while ago, but I'm intrigued by the fact that everyone's a convert to it. I think the reason why they're a convert to it is partly because of net zero. If you set a civilizational target to get to somewhere, there is a gap between your ability to hit that, produce the amount of energy that consumers still need, and the amount of energy that you are producing. And we just seem to be adding to that target by doing things like saying we need to move towards electric cars. There was a very interesting article in The Guardian this weekend by Rowan Atkinson about how polluting it is to actually produce an electric car. So given this gap between our ambitions and where the technology actually lies, and given that it won't all be filled with wind, what are we going to do? Well, the answer is partly some new exploration of gas, etc. But the answer is also nuclear power. So the fact that so many left-wing parties are now saying you should have been building nuclear power stations sooner, when I can remember 10, 20 years ago it was really controversial on the left to be pro-nuclear, I just find that shift fascinating. But it's actually being forced by environmental commitments. People are going pro-nuclear because they can see that the renewables, where the tech is with that right now, can't deliver the electricity you will still need consumers to have.
Well, I'm going to come back to that with you in just a minute. How much is it going to cost consumers, this commitment to nuclear that Keir Starmer is certainly making and you feel the government is progressing towards? Because Emma thinks it's going to eventually mean lower bills, which will be a relief to consumers. But in the meantime, we're going to be paying more, aren't we?
A significant amount of money is needed to get new nuclear on. It's
who's
one of the
paying for
reasons
that?
why we brought 2 on and why we're trying to work through how to do more. The reason for the money we're putting into small modular reactors, the next generation of nuclear, is in order to see whether we can find ways to do this more effectively and more efficiently over the long term. So yes, nuclear costs money, but part of the energy transition...
So where's the funding? But where's the funding going to come from?
Well, part of it is going to come from private companies. You know, we have EDF who put a lot of money into one of these, and part of it is going to come from the government. But the government has finite resources, and this is where the Labour Party, who announced all of these wonderful plans over many, many different areas, and it doesn't all come together in a way which works. We don't have the amount of money.
Under GB Energy and our Green Prosperity Plan.
But when is that going to happen? Let me just ask you specifically on the issue that Tim raises, because the GMB, the union who is disagreeing with you over not having any more gas and oil exploration licences, they've released research indicating there are up to 2 months of days every year where there is too little wind or sun to generate electricity. You want to see nuclear fill that gap. It won't be ready, as you say, for quite a long time. Are you sure you can wind down that gas exploration in the meantime?
Over a period of time, obviously. I mean, it's a transition period. I mean, I think this is where I think some of the news in this has got a little bit, I don't know, a little bit hysterical. It's not like we're saying Labour's going to turn the tap off, bang, when we're in government, no oil, no gas. We're saying there's going to be a transition period. And over that transition period, as we build up our capabilities in renewable and nuclear, we will reduce our dependence on oil and gas. It's a perfectly sensible policy. Instead of saying, right, if we committed tomorrow to introducing new oil and gas, as I've already said, it would take 28 years on average to get that going. In 28 years' time, what I would want to be seeing for our country is a green country with GB Energy, giving people that energy security they need, giving people lower bills, not polluting in the way that oil and gas have done.
That's not
that
what
is
your
our
leader
policy.
said.
Hang on,
our
let Lee
policy
respond
is
and
to
I'll come to
slowly
Sonia.
transition from oil and gas to renewable and to nuclear. I mean, it's not what some of the headlines say in
I'm
the
still
newspapers.
not sure what happens
that
in
is our
between when the
policy.
That's not what your
The
leader has
transition.
said. Your leader has said no more licences. Not
No
slow
more new.
Not slow transition.
No more new licences.
No more new
So what we
licences
have,
coming
yeah,
on.
so what
no
we have at the
more
moment,
new oil and gas
that's
fields
what I've
coming
just
on.
said.
How can you
what
transition
we have at the moment
when you're cutting
will
off the ability
continue
to
be used? What
and
we
is
have at the
reducing
moment,
year on year?
Of course it is, and at the same time as you get through this transition process, you build up your reliability on nuclear and renewable.
Hang on.
It's not incoherent to say you need a transition policy.
Is it incoherent, or is it possible, totally viable, to say no to any new gas and oil licences, keep the existing stuff and hope that everything's online in time before either the lights go out or people can't afford to pay their energy bills?
Well, I think it is, because I think actually setting yourself a target is, it works wonders in terms of ensuring that politicians get the country to where it needs to be in terms of green and nuclear. And I think, you know, we do need to take a step back from this and say, well, why are we doing this? Why has there been the shift in opinion politically when it comes to nuclear? And the net zero target isn't just plucked from thin air. It's based on a scientific assessment of what we need to do as a world to reduce carbon emissions in order to avoid catastrophic climate change that would be huge hugely problematic for our grandchildren, our grandchildren's children in the decades to come. So the question is, you know, we could make this happen. How much do we want to do it? How important is it that there's a world that our grandchildren and our grandchildren's children can inhabit?
All right, let's talk about the COVID inquiry, because public hearings get underway next week. But the government has launched a legal challenge over the inquiry's demand for WhatsApp messages and documents between mainly ministers. Let's just show you the headline in the iNews. COVID inquiry chair, that's Baroness Heather Hallett, set to take tough line on government legal action over Boris Johnson WhatsApps. Now, the COVID-bereaved Families for Justice group has held a press conference this morning in which they've addressed the legal battle, and we can talk to Saleha Hassan. Hello to you, Saleha. What's your reaction to the legal action that the government wants to take?
I think it's unnecessary, costly and very distressing for those of us who actually lost loved ones during both waves of COVID, and also really distressing and infuriating towards the healthcare workers who were on the front line for COVID. I'm one of them. I'm a doctor and I was working in COVID, and it was quite clear that things were not wholly correct in what was being fed down to us and how we should operate in this situation. Clearly things were not going well centrally. That was obvious for us on the ground.
Right.
So getting to the bottom of this and the truth is vital.
And how's it affected your family?
So my family, my father, Hassan al-Haq Chowdhury, was a retired teacher. He had 6 children. 5 of us are doctors, one's a pharmacist. We all worked on the COVID frontline. We chose to do our job and respond to a national crisis, and in doing so, because of what we were doing, stayed away from our father for fear of infecting him. My father caught COVID during the Partygate season. He was admitted to hospital on the day of the infamous Allegra Stratton press conference rehearsal. So getting to the bottom of what was going on and the truth is vitally important. And I have to say, on a personal level, what's going on right now is significantly triggering. Every single day over the last 2 weeks, and this debacle has been going on, I have on a daily basis gone back in my own head and having flashbacks to those days, not just for my own father, who I was with right at the end as he struggled to breathe, but also on behalf of my patients. I think of Margaret, the nurse. I make films, so I was making films at the time. And my Channel 4 dispatches, I was with Margaret, who was a retired NHS nurse, who we said goodbye to as we intubated her, and she didn't wake up. I think about Margaret. I think about my other patients who didn't make it.
All right.
So this is shameful.
Yeah, all right, Saleha, no, I mean, your distress is clear for all of us to hear. We have a government minister here. Listening to that, just to go back to the original point that Saleha made, that actually the legal action, never mind triggering the whole distressing sort of past and history as to what happened to her family and patients, but just this idea that the government is going to take legal action on the inquiry in terms of releasing these documents is unnecessary, costly and, yeah, emotionally traumatic.
Well, I absolutely understand some of the things which people are talking about in terms of how difficult COVID was, in terms of what happened. A member of my family passed away. I was on the end of a phone with somebody who couldn't breathe. I saw from my constituency how difficult it was. And there's a huge amount to learn from that very, very difficult period. And I absolutely agree with that. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But what the very, very narrow discussion is here is about what is handed over and how it is handed over. And there's already been, I think, something like 50,000 pieces of information already handed over. So we are absolutely determined to comply with what we are trying to do with this inquiry, to get to the truth, to the point that was just made a moment ago. And this is a very narrow discussion about what boundaries should be set around that.
Saleha, do you accept that?
No, there should be no boundaries. Dame Deirdre Hine, who chaired the swine flu inquiry in 2009, thinks that this action is ill-advised. Lord Gavin Barwell, the Chief of Staff to Theresa May, also thinks this is a bad idea. To get to the truth, you need to be able to see everything that is being called for.
Well,
Baroness Hallett has asked for everything unredacted. She will then decide what should be redacted.
Right, well, let me put that to Lyra. What's wrong with that? Let Heather Hallett decide what... I can't remember the phrase. What was it? Unambiguously irrelevant, I think, is the expression that has been used. Let her decide. If it's about coffees, if it's about logistics, she'll disregard them.
Well, my understanding is that there's a pretty, notwithstanding the hugely important issue here, we all want to get to the truth. We all want to understand what happened. We all want to, God forbid anything like this happens in the future, have learnt lessons in readiness for it. But the reality is that this is a pretty standard process whereby people who are going through inquiries or through legal processes, they say, we want to have all of the information related to this, and then that is handed over. But everything else, which is unambiguously nothing to do with that inquiry, with the subject which they're looking at, shouldn't need to be handed over. Right, that seems pretty reasonable.
Well, is that reasonable, Saleha, that actually there will be stuff that will have no impact on how policy decisions were made, on why certain things were agreed upon during the COVID pandemic, that they should be redacted?
You know, this doesn't sound like it's to do with that. This makes it sound like there's stuff and material and content that the Cabinet and the current Prime Minister and other ministers do not want the public to see or Baroness Hallett to see. This doesn't sound anything like benign coffees or other irrelevant conversations or chats. If they had nothing to hide, there'd be nothing to hold back. And what this is doing is delaying. It's going to delay Module 2 and it's going to cost even more money. And I'll tell you what it is doing, because everyone thinks that they'll lose. It is just focusing the attention more on what's in there.
Well, Saleha, let me pick up that point. As you say, people think they're going to lose anyway. I mean, who is going to win this, Tim?
This is a very strange case. The government said it wanted to fight on a point of principle what documents can be handed over to the inquiry, and it was doing it on behalf of Boris Johnson. But then Boris Johnson intervened and said, but I want my stuff to be handed over to the inquiry. So the person who, in theory, they were trying to help then said, but I want it to be shared anyway. So that raises that's caused some doubt about what precisely is it, what material really is it that they're trying to stop going there. And one theory going around Westminster is it's stuff which embarrasses
the Prime Minister,
Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor at the time. But having said that, the inquiry is only due to report, I believe, in 2026. The inquiry is not about getting politicians. It's not even about Partygate. It's about trying to ascertain what happened, what went wrong, and what should be done in the future. By the way, by which time it may well be significantly out of date, because we're talking 3 years hence, and one would hope that pandemic policy will have been developed in those 3 years, that we're not all hanging around for the inquiry. So you'll have to ask yourself, why has the government allowed itself to be drawn into this political battle, which looks like it's trying to hide something, when it won't be of great political salience by 2026, by which time Keir Starmer will be Prime Minister and you'll very probably be Foreign Secretary by that point.
Oh, well, there's something to look forward to.
I don't quite understand why they've done it.
I think some of that conversation with Saleha highlighted the issues with what the government's done as well, which is that trust is very low in government on this issue amongst some people, particularly people who lost relatives. That is partly down to the actions of government. For example, in Partygate, the fact that we know there were ministers and senior civil servants involved in breaking regulations that they expected the rest of the country to live by. Because that trust is low, it looks terrible that the government is trying to hold stuff back. They set up this statutory inquiry. The judge has very wide-ranging powers. It is absolutely up to her to request what she wants and to decide what it is in the public interest to be known and not to be known. And I'm afraid there's a reason why this creates a perception of a cover-up, and it's because the government has been found wanting in other areas in relation to pandemic policy.
Well, and it is very clear. The 2005 Inquiries Act, Lee, allows an inquiry head to require any person to provide any documents in his custody or control that relate to a matter in question at the inquiry. It's absolutely clear and unequivocal. The government won't win, I mean, because it states it in that Act in 2005.
As you say, the Act says in relation to that matter. And at the moment, we're having a big discussion, and a discussion which I understand a lot of people out watching will not have got to necessarily all of the detail. But this is a discussion about things which aren't related to that matter, and whether that should or shouldn't be handed over.
So the question is who should decide that issue of relevance?
But Saleha, you're shaking your head at what Lee has just said.
I think, you know, it's jaw-dropping to hear this. As you've just said, it's written in black and white. Everything that Baroness Hallett requests should be handed over. It's written in law. I think this is an unnecessary, really hurtful manoeuvre that the Cabinet Office are taking. Again, it just smacks of cover-up. I'm sorry, there's no other way around it.
Right. Lee?
I'm ever so sorry, and I completely appreciate the sensitivity of this. There's a member of my family that died of COVID. Members of the MPs from all sides of the House of Commons had people who they know and who they loved and who were hugely important to them, who, like you, died as well. And I understand that, and I get how sensitive this is. But this is such a small discussion, and it's about whether it relates, and it's about whether it relates to the specific things, the truth that you've asked for. It's about whether this information is relevant to that at all. And I do think that's important that we understand that and we get clarity from the legal system about how that works.
And it's down to the chair to decide what's relevant.
In relation to the matter.
Not Rishi Sunak,
in relation to the matter.
Not you.
Right. Emma, would you accept our lives have changed significantly since the Inquiries Act was passed and written? Communication has become much more informal, casual even. A lot more people rely on text messages to conduct business. But that actually that makes the lines a lot more blurred when it comes to deciding categorically should everything be turned over.
No, I think it's pretty straightforward. I think if you're having a WhatsApp group that's set up to discuss things related to COVID,
so nothing's private.
Well, if you're sending something to your mum to say have a nice birthday, keep that private. If you're sending something to a WhatsApp group that's about a pandemic and what national policy is going to be, then clearly that's not. But the point is the chair. The point is that the chair is the person that makes the decision, and I'm sure she is more than intelligent and capable of looking at something and saying, do you know, that is about a coffee, not relevant. Oh, that is about discussing the Help Out to Eat Out scheme. That is relevant. She is more than capable of making that decision herself. We should show her the respect that her position demands, give her the information. And I'm sorry, but only this government would take legal action against an inquiry that they started. I mean, again, it's just nonsense.
Saleha Hassan, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Have a little listen to this.
Basic income helps me psychologically because I'm free to do what I want to do. So I'm free to write, to work.
Starting the restaurant, I wouldn't have started it without the basic income that enabled me to take the risk. We want to offer fresh food, local produce, and seasonal food.
So two people there from a documentary the BBC made on a universal income pilot. It took place in Finland and concluded in 2019. And the aim is to see if a guaranteed safety net would help people find jobs primarily. Now, there are going to be two pilot schemes starting here. 30 people in central Jarrow, in Tyne Wear and East Finchley in London. They'll be paid a lump sum of £1,600 without conditions each month for 2 years. This is what the Mail says about it. Sit around, do nothing and get paid £1,600 a month. Sounds great. Universal Income Benefits trial will see people rake in cash for doing zilch. Do you agree with the Mail, Lee?
Yeah, sounds about right.
Why?
Because this isn't how the world works. This isn't how reality works. If people want money and they're able to earn it, they should go out and earn it. When people go out of their doors in North East Derbyshire every day, they go out to earn money to provide for themselves and their family and their community. We shouldn't be giving money for free, for no reason, to people for nothing.
Tim?
What is the difference between that and, say, a housing benefit? We don't allow people to go without shelter. We don't allow people to go without food. So why not roll it all together in one benefit and call it a minimum income guarantee?
Targeted to where need is. UBI would give £1,600 a month to Richard Branson. Makes no sense.
No, but he wouldn't. No, but he wouldn't claim it because he wouldn't need it. That's an unfair misrepresentation.
But he would be eligible. He would be eligible for it, Tim. We're giving our taxpayers' money to billionaires who we hope might not claim for it.
Well, by the way, there are parts of the benefit system with pensions that do that. There are certain benefits that you can already claim if you are a billionaire. But look, there was actually in the 1960s one person who was in favour of a form of minimum income guarantee was Milton Friedman, the libertarian economist, though in his case it was a negative income tax, which was a bit different. The argument back then was we are creating this patchwork welfare system, which is really complicated and bureaucratic. Let's replace it with a single benefit that guarantees everyone a certain income. So one benefit is you get to eliminate all that bureaucracy. Everyone knows where their stands. Everyone is guaranteed a certain amount coming in. But the other benefit as we go into the future with the rise of AI is we're going to increasingly see low-income jobs either being paid so poorly that you have to top up the income, which is what we already do in a form, or we're just going to see mass redundancies.
Right.
In which case, I think we're going to move towards Western governments basically putting people on the payroll.
Well, people have been predicting mass redundancies since time immemorial. So if you look 150 years ago, economists were predicting that, by the 1950s there would be far fewer jobs. Funnily enough, that doesn't happen. I understand the arguments for universal basic income, and Tim is right, they come both from right and left. But I disagree, because I think it's quite a utopian idea in some ways, because if you were to pay everyone the level that, for example, people with children would need to survive, it would be completely unaffordable and it would lead to a huge increase in the taxation system. I think it's right that we have a targeted benefit system. You're right, it does create bureaucracy. That is a downside. But that bureaucracy is necessary because essentially what our benefit system does is it redistributes away from people with means to particularly low-paid parents with children who don't earn enough in no skill work. I also think that the arguments for UBI actually detract from a policy focus on increasing pay and quality of work. And I think that's actually where a Labour government should be focused, because people want to have jobs. They want to have jobs with dignity. They want to earn money from a job in general that allows them to support themselves and their families independently. They don't want a basic income of £1,600 a month and then being told by politicians, sorry, your job may not exist in 50 years.
No, the psychological benefit, as I think that clip was hinting, of the guaranteed income, is your freedom to look for the work, is your freedom to invest in a small company, is your freedom to take risks.
But that would make sense, Tim, if that assessment, which happened in Finland a couple of years ago, had worked, and it was demonstrated not to. Just like your negative income tax, which was trialled in America in the 60s and in the 70s, it didn't work either. So, bring us a policy which is workable, we'll have a look at it. This one doesn't work.
Well, there is, just before I come to you, Emma, and I will, on the figures, in September 2020, a study from Georgetown University said that the UK could provide everyone with a universal basic income that would amount to £67 billion per year. But actually, the Office for Budget Responsibility says universal credit and legacy benefit spending is £72 billion a year. So it might be cheaper then to go for a UBI.
I would want to look at the detail on that. The idea that you can give £1,600 to every single adult in the United Kingdom and it not be completely
would it encourage people to go to work? Would it encourage people to go to work?
I do think it is slightly amusing, I'm sorry, but it has to be said that the government are suddenly upset about giving billionaires lots of money, which is exactly what their furlough scheme did. But anyway, we won't go down there about giving billionaires lots of money they don't necessarily need.
What's your policy in Wales on UBI?
I think it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting system, and it's for care leavers.
Yeah, which is completely different. I support it.
No.
But for care leavers, it's incredibly important because of the circumstances that we know that they face when they need financial support. So universal support for care leavers is a brilliant idea. It's not
all right.
Well,
let's just park that for a moment. But let's just get to this idea why you say it's interesting, but that doesn't mean
it's not a priority for the Labour Party, no. But I think it's interesting, and I think where we've done it, just to mention the point in Wales, where we've done it specifically for care leavers in Wales, which is a trial, and I think, you should show an interest in and look what happens there and look what impact it has on that particular group of incredibly incredibly disadvantaged people. So let's have a look at that. But no, it's not a priority for us. I think what we need to be doing is making work actually pay. We've got too many people who at the moment are the working poor, too many people going out to work, not having enough money to live on, too many people needing top-ups from the credit system, as Tim was saying. We have at the moment the government topping up wages because they don't earn enough. We should be looking at the Low Pay Commission to actually make people have affordable jobs. It goes back to we need good jobs in this country, which is, you know, why I love GB Energy and the fact it's going to bring these new high-quality jobs all around the country.
And so would you like to see the pay rises that are being asked for
I would
example,
like to
in the
see
public
people,
sector be granted?
When did it in this country become? When did it in this country become some sort of utopian dream to have enough money to live? People should be able to earn enough money to live. If they're going out and they're grafting every day, and you think about those people working in care, we've heard from the doctors and those working in the NHS. What about people working in adult social care?
So you would
incredibly
all right,
hard
well, let
job.
Lee respond to that.
Yes, they should be paid more.
Right, they should be paid more above inflation more.
I think people should earn enough money to be able to live. If you're going out working hard, you should be able to have a good standard of living.
Of course they should have enough money to live, and that is why we need to set people free and with the dignity of work. And for those people who can't be supported, we provide benefits. You know, UBI doesn't work, it just gives money for nothing.
On that, it's all we have time for. I'll let them discuss it longer afterwards. We'll have more Politics Live at 12:15 here tomorrow on BBC Two. From all of us, bye-bye.